And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, is today when we'll finally see Marjorie Taylor Greene in a goat suit? And how does one distinguish a wildfire from a gender reveal party? And now, the podcast host who, even on his worst day, would never mistake his own toothbrush for yours, Pete Dominick.
Yes, that's Pete Code. Thank you very much. Welcome to the show. Two great guests joining me on today's program for the first time ever on the podcast. She was a regular at the old radio show at SiriusXM. Shannon Watts, who I absolutely love. Moms Demand Action Against Gun Violence, joins me. Also, Dr. Brian Rosenwald is back from University of Pennsylvania. He's a history professor, an expert on media and politics, and wrote a whole book about talk radio. Shannon Watts, Brian Rosenwald, both joining me today, and I've got an announcer, everybody. Pretty cool. You want to send him some jingles? Want to send him some funny things to say, making fun of me or the show or the world? standupwithpete@gmail.com. We should set up an email for that, Pete. Okay. Hello. Hello, friend. How you doing? Checking in with you right now here at the top. Hope you're checking in with yourself. Hope you're taking good care of yourself. I read a long article in The Atlantic to prepare for my appearance on MSNBC on Saturday night. See what I did there? It's on MSNBC. And is that a brag, really, at this point? And I read something that I wanted to share with you. It's called Coming Out of COVID by Ed Young, by the way. But I read, as hard as the initial trauma is, it's the aftermath that destroys people. You've been swimming furiously for a year. You don't expect to finally reach dry land and feel like you're drowning. It's a great article, and it helps explain the mental trauma that many of us have dealt with or gone through as a result of the pandemic. I'll say I haven't dealt with trauma as it relates to the pandemic. I've enjoyed a lot of the things that have developed as a result in my own personal life and career, but I didn't lose anybody to it or during that time either. So trauma, capital T, lowercase t, regardless, if you are kind of wondering what's wrong, it could be the aftermath of everything that we've been through. And I wanted to share that with you right here at the top. Sorry to get too somber right there at the top. Maybe that brought it down. I'll bring the energy back up, everybody. How about that? If I talk like this more and tell you how excited I am for Memorial Day weekend and that my garden is really coming together and I just got 5 yards of topsoil delivered to put on the finishing touches. How about that? That's good. What's good in your life? Tonight, Team Stand Up should be a good thing if you are a fan, supporter, or contributor to the show, like so many of you are. It is our program, and I want to invite you to help figure out ideas on how to make it better, smarter, funnier, how to promote it, how to grow the community, and with it, my income. That's right. I'm looking for you to give me advice on how to make this show better so I can make more money from the shed. It's going well. It's going really well. I cannot thank you enough for those of you who do subscribe. I know a lot of people that are trying to do what I'm doing and are wondering how I've done it. They're jealous and they're envious, which is fine because I'm jealous and envious of others. It's a natural feeling, but I'm at a point right now where I am in a great groove, feeling really good about it, but would love to have a discussion with you, the listeners, supporters of this independent media program. So if you want to join me, that's tonight at 7 p.m. East, because I got to go to bed in not too long. I get up early to do the show during the summer, or at least I'm trying to. There is a link on today's email if you're a subscriber, so just go to that, and I'll see you tonight at 7 for the Team Stand Up first ever meeting. You want to be a listener, producer of the program, I hope to see you there. All right, lots to talk about in the news. It's time to get to the last 24. Oh, man. Today's last 24 is focused heavily on the anti-Semitism and the Wuhan COVID lab leak theory. So nothing but fun and games. Let's first start, though, with, there has been a tremendous rise in violence and brutality against Jewish folks just in the streets and, of course, online. And it's as a result both of the Middle East conflict and of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and other right-wing commentators saying all kinds of horrible things. And so first, let's react to that again, get more reaction to Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments, which I think is important, and then wrap it up with Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League. But let's start with CNN and Jake Tapper, who happens to be Jewish, talking to commentator Amanda Carpenter on his show The Lead on CNN yesterday. I thought this was pretty good.
What was your reaction when you heard those comments? Because I have to say, and I mean, I'm used to all sorts of, dog whistles about being Jewish and about Jews, but to compare Pelosi saying, if you're not vaccinated, you need to wear a mask, to the slaughter of 6 million Jews, babies, children, women, old people, men, and the idea, to me, it just signifies, you really think that a Jewish life is worth so little that it's equal to asking you to wear a mask?
Yeah, but this is like trivializing the death and despair that people suffer. So she has political gain, right? This is like the competitive grievance and victimhood. And you can't tell me anything, you liberal Democrats, because I, as a Republican, I'm being suppressed. There aren't many policy ideas in the Republican Party right now. It's all based on grievance and partisanship. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets that. It works. It's what the Republican base likes. And right now, there's not anything that competes with it, that drives up that outrage and can get people involved to counter it. That's why I'm saying, don't dismiss the stuff that she is doing. Don't dismiss the audit that's going around in Arizona, because they're going to take that on the road. I mean, there's been no consequences for January 6th, no consequences for the big lie. And so, my Democratic friends, Joe Biden is doing a good job, but everyone seems to think we can just look at our reform agenda and pass these bills. Meanwhile, all around the country, this thing is going on and taking hold of the Republican imagination.
There you go, Amanda Carpenter with CNN's Jake Tapper. Also on CNN, John Berman, who is an anchor and identifies as ethnically Jewish, but he's not religious. He had something to say about it, and this clip starts with the comments made by Marjorie Taylor Greene and then John's powerful reaction to it. Here it is.
I stand by all of my statements. I said nothing wrong, and I think any rational Jewish person didn't like what happened in Nazi Germany, and any rational Jewish person doesn't like what's happening with overbearing mask mandates.
Any rational Jewish person? I'm Jewish. I'm not at all religious, and thank God my family made it to this country decades before the Holocaust, but that's my heritage. And I promise you that Congresswoman Taylor Greene, she thinks I'm Jewish. So as a rational Jewish person, let me just say to Marjorie Taylor Greene, don't you dare speak for me. Not if you're going to compare health measures or anything to the Holocaust. In a tweet last night, she said, I'm sorry if my words make people uncomfortable. No, they don't make me uncomfortable. They make me sick.
Go get him, Johnny. Love that guy. Always really cool to me at CNN and on Twitter. And let's now go to another guy I know very well, Jonathan Greenblatt. I like him a lot. I respect him a lot. And his organization, the Anti-Defamation League. He was on, again, let's stay with CNN, Wolf Blitzer.
And so the audacity here is incredibly frightening to the community. But in addition to the area and the audacity, Wolf, the amplification, social media has spread this like wildfire. We saw one tweet last week that said basically Hitler was right. That was spread more than 17,000 times. And so for all these reasons across the country, the Jewish community is terrified.
What message, Jonathan, is the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives sending right now by not condemning those disgusting, deeply offensive comments from Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Look, we know Marjorie Taylor Greene clocks in, Wolf, somewhere between deranged and demented, right? This is a woman who thinks there are Jewish space lasers starting forest fires. She's a QAnon enthusiast. She is offensive in almost everything that she does. But in this moment, when assaults are spiraling across the country, we need leaders from both sides of the aisle to speak out clearly and consistently. Leaders need to lead, whether they're members of Congress, who need to say clearly that, when you attack Jewish people because you're angry about the Middle East, that isn't activism, it's anti-Semitism. So I want to see members of Congress from the left and the right clearly cogently say anti-Semitism is unacceptable. But
all right, great job, Jonathan Greenblatt. A lot more where that comes from, and I'm definitely reaching out to him today to try to get some time with him for the podcast. My thoughts going out to all of my Jewish friends and listeners here who are living in fear of these kinds of horrible attacks in real life and in social media. It's scary and it's horrible, and I thought Greenblatt laid it out pretty well right there. All right, now we go from the rise in anti-Semitism to the rise in denial and conspiracy theory now being, unfortunately, I'm not going to say led by, but contributing to it is the NBA, the biggest probably star athlete in the entire country, who has done a lot, I think, of social good with civil rights issues, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot more. But he really fails here when he doesn't, I think, go out and give an unfiltered, unadulterated endorsement of getting vaccinated. Here is LeBron James with a confusing and dangerous message, I would argue.
Anything I do off the floor is predicated to my family, for the majority. I mean, for 99.9% of that. So, it's about the health and safety of my family. And that's what it came down to. Me being available to my teammates on the floor, me taking care of my body.
Do you mind me asking if you're confirming that you did get the vaccine?
It's not a big deal.
Yes, it is. It's a huge deal. And now everybody's going to talk about it, and everybody should talk about it to some extent. I think you've got to have celebrities leading here. And I think just sometimes people think that celebrities are, and they often are, wealthy, affluent folks who have access to a knowledge base that the rest of us might not. And what is it that LeBron James knows or has been told as to why he's not getting vaccinated? I think it's dangerous. I think it's bad. And here is a little conversation about it on CNN with former CDC Director of Public Health Preparedness and Response, Dr. Ali Khan, commenting.
So you're right. It's hard to know whether when he talked about protecting the safety of his family, it meant he immediately went out and got vaccinated, because that's how you protect the safety of yourself and your family, or if there were some other concerns that he didn't get vaccinated. But you're spot on. It would be ideal if people, superstars like him, sort of shared the message that the vaccine's very safe and very effective. And now we've had over 1 billion people vaccinated, so we can say that with confidence that these vaccines are safe and effective.
All right, so the debate over the conversation, I should say, over the origins of the COVID virus continues. New information coming out about that, with news from the Wall Street Journal about 3 scientists that got sick in late 2019 with COVID-like symptoms. And now Dr. Fauci saying he's really not sure right now about the question regarding a possible lab. And I've got some nuance here for you, but here first is Dr. Fauci's comments that made a lot of news yesterday.
There's a lot of cloudiness around the origins of COVID-19 still. So I wanted to ask, are you still confident that it developed naturally?
Oh, I'm not convinced about that. I think that we should continue to investigate what went on in China until we find out, to the best of our ability, exactly what happened. Certainly, the people who've investigated say it likely was the emergence from an animal reservoir that then infected individuals, but it could have been something else, and we need to find that out.
So given new information, we can develop different ideas as opposed to just coming up with narratives as we so often do. And that's the point that MSNBC's Chris Hayes made during his monologue on All In. I think he's a very smart guy, and he talked about the narrative first approach. I thought this was super helpful, and so I want to share this couple minutes from Chris Hayes with you right now to help you understand.
As I said, there are some suggestive data points, like this new Wall Street Journal reporting, that makes it at least plausible. It's not like impossible. There was some early speculation that it was like a bioweapon, but that's just implausible. The genomic sequencing tells us it's not. Okay. But in terms of where it started, did it start in a market, in a food market, among some animals there, or in this virology lab? The World Health Organization said no hypothesis is off the table. The real answer is we really just do not know concretely for a bunch of reasons, partly because the Chinese government is not exactly like touring everyone through the origins of this thing. But it's all kind of indicative of this strange narrative-first approach of so much of the conservative media's coverage of the virus in the beginning. I mean, since January of last year, right, we've seen these bizarre twists and turns in the coverage, which always seem to put some ideologically useful, polarizing story first, like the Chinese government is bad, or our heroic president has found the miracle cure in a malaria drug, rather than any attempt to just in good faith assess what is happening with a complicated and deadly once-in-a-century pandemic. And that impulse, that's pretty ubiquitous, and it can be contagious for all of us. The most important rule to follow with COVID or anything else, right, is just to try, in good faith, with diligence and rigor and curiosity, to assemble the best picture of knowledge you can. What are the facts in the world? And then see what the social and political implications are after you have a handle on that. And that way you don't end up with these bizarre contradictions that if it was the Chinese government that unleashed COVID, well, then it's horrible and more proof of the irredeemability of the Chinese Communist Party. But also, COVID is really not that bad and liberals are crazy for overreacting. It's just the flu, right? The narrative-first failures of right-wing media during this pandemic, I think, have tangibly degraded the nation's ability both to govern itself and fight off pandemics. But it is not exclusive to them. Those impulses suffuse all of us, and I'm speaking about myself here, right, that do this for a living. It should be an object lesson to all of us, not to let ourselves view the world primarily as through a set of facts that may or may not be conveniently marshaled for a specific political end.
Well, what do you think he was trying to say there? I mean, new information means we can start to change the way that we think about a topic, an issue, a crime, or COVID-19 and the origins. There was a lot of speculation for such a long time, and people ran away with whatever narrative that they wanted. And I think that's what he was saying. But I thought that was thoughtful and helped me understand what the hell was happening right now with this story. And now here is President Biden's spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, being asked about this by none other than Steve Doocy of Fox News. He's not asking, terrible questions. There's nothing wrong with questions until he gets to, why doesn't just Joe Biden just call up the Chinese president and ask him to give him the stuff he wants, which is, as Jen Psaki said, that's not quite how it works. And she does a great job to answer his first question with just 2 words. Often that's the best way to handle it. Why are you doing this? We are.
The origins of COVID. There's a new Wall Street Journal story that 3 researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology were hospitalized with symptoms consistent with both COVID-19 and common seasonal illness in November of 2019. That's something that is apparently known to U.S. intel officials. So why isn't President Biden pushing for more access, more information to get to the bottom of exactly what happened?
We are. And we have repeatedly called for the WHO to support an expert-driven evaluation of the pandemic's origins that is free from interference or politicization. Now, there were phase 1 results that came through. We were not, during that first phase of the investigation, there was not access to data. There was not information provided. And now we're hopeful that WHO can move into a more transparent, independent phase 2 investigation.
But with 589,920 dead Americans, at what point does President Biden say, we don't want to wait for the WHO. We don't know what they're doing. This needs to be an American-led effort to get to the bottom of what happened.
Well, first of all, we need access to the underlying data and information in order to have that investigation.
And why not? But he talks all the time about how he's known President Xi for a long time. So why can't he just call
and we need
ask
them
him for that information?
I think you're misunderstanding how this process actually works. An international investigation led by the World Health Organization is something that we've actually been pressing for several months in coordination with a range of partners around the world. We need that data. We need that information from the Chinese government. What we can't do, and what I would caution anyone doing, is leaping ahead of an actual international process. We don't have enough data and information to drum to a conclusion at this point in time.
So is there any amount of casualties from COVID in this country that would make you want to not wait for an international effort and just do it as...
Okay, well, there's more. The press conference is about an hour long, but I wanted to give you some context on that whole situation And I'll certainly be talking about it with experts like Dr. Megan May. I'm scheduled to talk with her today and more. So let me know what questions you have about this news story developing. And Joe Biden tried to add something good to the news cycle yesterday. Here he is talking about additional funds for extreme weather preparations during a visit to FEMA.
Today, I'm announcing that FEMA is going to make $1 billion available to the states, territories, tribes, and rural communities through the Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities Program, so-called BRIC program.
The what program?
So-called BRIC program.
BRIC program? Okie doke.
That's going to double the funding available from last year, and it's going to help communities, including those too often overlooked. And it's going to invest in resilience and better protect themselves to serve for other climate events that we're going to be facing.
All right, somebody needs to give him some caffeine. He started off okay, and then he just continued to lose energy in under a minute. Come on, Joe. Deliver, Joe. You can do it, Joe. Did I just become Mick from Rocky? Come on, Joe. Keep the energy up. Okay, sorry about that. All right, now let's get to everything else that I've got for you. That's all the audio, but here we go. It's time for the news dump. Trigger warning, there is a gunshot sound effect in this absurd comedy bit.
50 billion birds on Earth, half of them with guns. We all better take cover during today's news dump.
Pete Cohen in collaboration with Dan McDonald. Well, I think you just said 25 billion birds have guns. That's terrifying. But it also shows Dan and Pete have been listening because I mentioned a story about billions of bird species here in the news dump a couple of episodes ago. But today I start with what the Wall Street Journal titled The Great American Cleanup. Deodorant, teeth whitener flying off the shelves. Everyone wants to look their best as restrictions ease. Stores say sales are shifting away from toilet paper and baking flour to cosmetics and swimsuits because Americans are cleaning up nicely. And we all want to take our masks off and, I guess, have our mouths look good and smell good. It's an interesting development that I wouldn't have thought was the case. See, because I'm not changing anything. I stay consistently smelling gorgeous and looking gorgeous, whether or not there is a global pandemic. Texas is going to permit carrying handguns without a license. Their governor is embarrassed that more people don't have guns, Governor Greg Abbott. And yesterday, Texas legislators approved removing some of the few remaining restrictions on gun ownership in the state. So more to learn about that terrifying development in Texas, and we'll be talking about it. Although that did happen. I read about that after I got Shannon Watts on today's program. So but we'll definitely be discussing that one. The Federal Aviation Administration reported that 2.5 thousand reports of unruly flyers this year. The number of cases way up, and air travel is getting busier. I mean, is there any surprise? That doesn't sound that much. 2,500 unruly passengers? That's it? Well, I'm sure anybody who's a flight attendant doesn't like me being so flip about that, or has been a passenger on a flight like that, but I thought there'd be more. There was a light train accident in a tunnel in Malaysia, injuring more than 200 people. And I mention that because in a weird kind of way, it's good news that there haven't been more accidents. But it's the first major crash for the 23-year-old metro system, according to the Associated Press. And while it was a terrible accident and a lot of people were injured, apparently, I guess no deaths as of the reporting that I'm seeing here. But that's a pretty good record right there. The European Union is going to impose sanctions on the Belarus for forcing a civilian airline flight to land. That's a crazy story. I read in a little bit to that, but a really important story as well. Biden, I want to learn more about that. President Biden calling for the release of this journalist that Belarus basically hijacked and kidnapped. Just a really important story with a lot of important implications. Florida has passed another crazy law. They're now going to fine social media companies that ban politicians. I think, what? How could that even be a thing? Why would it be a thing? And how could it be a thing, and will social media companies care about that thing? I'm really wondering about that terrible development. But, of course, it's coming out of Florida, where a lot of people think if Trump doesn't run, and I don't think that he will, hopefully he won't make it that far, that Ron DeSantis, is that his name, or is it Rick DeSantis? Sorry, Florida. Dr. Barry Hummel always nails me on that, which I think is hilarious that I even get the guy's name wrong because I hate him so much. Anyway, that Ron DeSantis is going to be the nominee for Republicans because he's just crazy enough and Trumpy enough. Anyway, in other news, Bitcoin prices tumble 50% from the peak. Japanese are very close to canceling the Olympics. Over 80% of Japanese public does not want the Olympics to happen, by the way, which I think is pretty crazy and important. Yet it's still on as of now. And after being banned by the Billboard Music Awards, country singer-songwriter Morgan Wallen has won multiple Billboard Music Awards. So last year he was banned, and this year he won a bunch of awards. I'm going to show the band. Okay. Yeah, this is as a result of last year, a video circulated that he had said the N-word and several other expletives while out on the town and drunk in Nashville. So that's just a terrible, awful, weird story. And unfortunately, it's where I've got to end today's news dump because I'm running out of time and I want to get this posted up with the sun, which has just come up outside the shed. So, just a reminder to join me tonight at 7 p.m. East on the Team Stand Up Hangout because one listener who I respect a lot doesn't love parts of the news dump. I'm always welcoming to all of your ideas, your criticism, and how to make things better. And Chris Mecca is awesome at that. He's like, I don't like this, but I do have suggestions. And that's always a great way to criticize anybody that you actually respect and admire. Hey, I don't like this, but I have some suggestions as to how to make this better. So if you have any similar ideas about anything, join us tonight at 7 p.m. East. If you're a subscriber, you will have the link. Okay, now it's time to get to my first guest who is joining me here on the podcast for the first time, though she joined me fairly a few times on the old SiriusXM show. She is the founder of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which is the leading force for gun violence prevention with chapters in all 50 states. You might be a member of this grassroots networks of moms and others who've successfully affected change at the local, state, and national level. There's always a lot, sadly, to talk about with gun violence, from homicide to suicide to the high-profile mass shootings, as well as all these other random accidents that happen at road rage incidents and domestic crime incidents. And so I really was excited to catch up with Shannon Watts, who's been always very cool to me. And so check her out. If you're not already following her on Twitter, you should, because she's very good on Twitter, at Shannon R. Watts, and of course, Moms Demand. If you're not a member or involved with their great organization or some other gun violence prevention organization, I hope you'll consider joining up, because that's what's going to make change in this country, which is so hard to do. But they're doing it, momsdemandaction.org. Here we go now with Shannon Watts for the first time on Stand Up. It's great to see you. It's been too long. The last time I talked to you, I was in corporate media, and this is the first time I'm talking on a podcast, and I'm very happy that you're joining me. Hi, Shannon Watts.
It is such an honor to be on your platform, and I missed your voice on the radio, but I love your podcast.
Thank you very, very much, and I'm happy to have you joining me. And I want to just ask you in terms of how your pandemic year, or a little over a year, has been in terms of working on this organization and working on these causes that you've been working on for so long. How have things changed? How have they gotten better or worse? And how has the issue itself evolved? If you want to take that big question first.
Yeah, if you go back to March of 2020, when America sort of shut down.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
I had just come off the road, which I spent about 4 days a week, every week on the road back then. And my very last trip was to be with Joe Biden. He was still just one of several nominees at the time. And we were in Columbus, Ohio, talking about gun safety. And he did a press conference. And it was the very last time that I was traveling for moms. But what was interesting was that we were about to have what we call an advocacy day. Every single state has one every year. And I now live in California, so I was going to be part of the California Advocacy Day. And it was going to be in person in Sacramento. We had more RSVPs than we've ever had before. And suddenly, with just a few days' notice, we had to pivot and completely do it online. And it was such an interesting lesson to us as activists, because what ended up happening was we had even more people participate than was going to participate by being in Sacramento, which we thought was a huge number anyway. And this is intuitive, but it really took a real life lesson to learn it, which is social media makes everything, social media, but also just having, the internet and being online and apps, it makes everything more equitable and inclusive, because you can't necessarily get from San Diego to Sacramento, but you can Zoom in during your lunch hour. And I don't think we'll ever go back to doing things the way we did them before. We seamlessly turned on a dime and started doing all of our work online. And we were sort of built for it because we started as a Facebook page. And so we had invested heavily in very high-tech technologies and apps and all kinds of things that we give to every volunteer. And most organizations only make those technologies available to their leadership. And so we were able to do this and do it really well. And I think it will always now be a part of our DNA going forward. But in terms of how the COVID crisis impacted gun violence, really gun violence is an epidemic within a pandemic.
Yeah.
Because every high-income country is experiencing the trauma and the logical outcomes of dealing with a pandemic. But on top of that, we're giving every citizen easy access to arsenals and ammunition. So it is no surprise to see domestic gun violence increase or gun homicides increase. We're still waiting on data, but possibly gun suicides. Certainly unintentional shootings, we know, have increased by about 30% when kids get a hold of guns. So this is certainly a crisis, and I think that we will feel the reverberations of this pandemic's impact on gun violence long after the COVID crisis is solved. One point I always want to make, and I know that I would imagine you try to make this point, is after horrible violence shootings, the ones that get the most attention, people often say nothing ever changes, but organizations like yours have created all kinds of changes at the local and state level for sure. I think usually people are referring to in Congress, and then they'll sit there and say mostly Republicans won't do anything, despite the fact that overwhelmingly 80%, 90% of Americans want this change or that change, background checks, etc. But the truth also that I think misses people is not in their districts. In their districts, they overwhelmingly don't want it. They're so gerrymandered that become so conservative and obviously so animated around the gun issue. What do I have right or wrong about those 2 points, Shannon? Well, you are right in that I think people are waiting for a cathartic moment in Congress, for 25 years now. 25 years of over 100 Americans dying every single day, 230 more wounded. And I understand the frustration, sure, but cynicism and hopelessness is misplaced. Because to your point, so much has been done. And really, this is how social issues in this country work, right? You don't just say to Congress, I really don't like this. I want marriage equality. And you get it the next day. I wish that's how the system was set up. It's not. It's set up for incremental change. And it's what I call the unglamorous heavy lifting of grassroots activism, which I think moms and women in particular are so cut out to do well, right? Showing up at every gun bill hearing, creating relationships with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, being pragmatic. And I think that's why we're winning in school boards, in city councils, in state houses. And it was about building momentum on the ground that would eventually point the right president and the right Congress in the right direction. I'm hopeful this is that president, this is that Congress. But regardless, you can't negate the amazing work that's been done now for almost a decade. And text 644-33. See, I sneaked this in there on people when they're not expecting it, and I'll put it in the show notes, 644-33 right now. And text the word ready. Text the word ready. Can we look at our phones? Does that work? Because I was thinking, like, you look at your phone and then you see the letters still? Is that 644-33? Ready? Yes. Oh.
I haven't done that in a long time.
That's how it works.
So definitely do that right now for Mom's Demand. So how do you look at the wins that you've accomplished? I mean, you've been involved in this issue in this organization for several years now. And how do you keep people motivated in terms of the triumphs? You've had many.
When you look at the polling that we do of our own volunteers, what we see is that what keeps them motivated is winning. I've been a full-time volunteer now for 8.5 years. I wouldn't wake up and do this work as a full-time job if I didn't think we were creating real change, life-saving change. We've now passed background checks in 21 states. We have passed something called the red flag law that allows a temporary restraining order to disarm someone who's a risk to themselves or others. We've passed that in 19 states. We've closed something called the Charleston loophole in 19 states. And essentially that says, it's a federal loophole that says a gun dealer can sell a gun after 3 days if a background check hasn't cleared. It's how the gunman in Charleston got his gun and shot 9 Black parishioners and killed them. We also have passed laws that disarm domestic abusers in 29 states. So this work adds up. We have a 90% track record of stopping the NRA's agenda year after year for the last 5 years. We have passed resolutions through school boards and city councils that requires our safe storage materials to be sent home, basically telling people the only way to securely store a gun is to keep it locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition. That's gone home with 1 million families across the country. And then we've gotten hundreds of companies to change their policies around mostly open carry, but others around, what guns they sell and to whom. Very important change that, again, it's like drips on a rock. It eventually leads to revolutions.
What do you say to people? You're so great on Twitter for a lot of different reasons, but what do you say to people? You just tweeted something about this poor 7-year-old boy who found his parents' gun loaded under the bed inside like a Bible or something, or a box or something, and I guess he shot himself and killed himself by accident. What do you say to people who say, I keep a gun for, self-defense, to protect my home, and I've hidden it, and you want me to have the ammo in a different spot and have it locked up? Well, that's not going to help me save my family. I mean, I think those scenarios of home invasion and you're going to get your gun and stop the intruder are stupid, because it's not going to happen. That you're going to get your gun, and it's probably not going to happen that you're going to get broken into. But finally, if someone breaks into my house, my family's there, I'd be like, just take whatever you need. I don't want to pull my gun on you because maybe you have a gun. It just seems like a completely unrealistic thing. All that being said, how do you convince those people that, gun locks or having the gun locked up will prevent these these kinds of horrific accidents. Not to mention suicides. In high school, we had a kid kill himself with his parents' shotgun. So that happens all the time. I'm just thinking of that I remember in my life.
Guns are now the number one killer of American children. It has surpassed vehicle deaths. And a big reason for that is easy access to unsecured guns. We know even before this pandemic started, about 4.6 million children in America lived in homes with unsecured guns. That number, given that there have been about 50 million new gun sales in the last year, has got to be higher, right? Because a lot of those gun sales were to new gun owners who may not have training, may not know how to securely store a firearm. Gun suicide is a horrific crisis in this country, particularly among children and teens. In addition, America is the only country where 2- and 3-year-olds get guns and unintentionally shoot themselves or others. And we don't call them accidental, because an accident means you've done everything you could, but something still happened. This is about gun owner negligence. You haven't done everything you could to stop this tragedy from happening. And really it is about gun owner negligence and the importance of restoring the responsibilities that should go along with gun rights, and that is securely storing your firearm.
So when we're talking about your organization and many others have gained a lot of popularity and support and have done amazing work, but we usually think mostly about the NRA. And I'm wondering what you think about their future and how powerful they still are, because there's a lot of controversy, of course, about they're being sued. And then they said they were bankrupt, and people may or may not know the story. New York Times did an interesting podcast about it today, as a matter of fact.
Yes. And
what they're saying is that Wayne LaPierre, who's head the NRA, has lost a lot of favor amongst his own supporters by using money for trips and his wife's hair and going on yachts and so on. But the fact of the matter is, if he's gone, if they push him out, somebody more effective might be able to replace him. And I wonder if you're concerned about that. That was the conclusion that the reporter gave.
I'm not concerned about that. It has taken decades for the NRA to get where they are, to amass the amount of power that they have, the amount of money that they have. And so to me, this is about how corrupt the organization is and has become, particularly in the last 10 years. As you talked about, misspending and sweetheart deals. They're even under investigation for being a foreign asset potentially to Russia. The NRA has been pulled right by the fact that each state has its own gun group, its own version of the NRA, but often is even more to the right of the NRA, almost how the Tea Party pulled Republicans to the right in the 90s. And so the NRA has become this very radicalized organization, but on top of that, clearly a corrupt organization. And I think we'll see a lot of interesting developments, whether it's around Wayne LaPierre's tenure as their CEO or the investigations that are happening right now in both DC and New York. They were laughed out of bankruptcy court. They were laughed out of bankruptcy court. And when a judge in a very rural Texas town whose nickname is Cooter doesn't agree with the NRA's bankruptcy filing, you're probably not a redneck, you're an elitist.
Wow. What do you say, what have you seen that's effective in terms of the conversation around guns? What works? How do we talk about this better? How do, even language, gun control, anti-gun violence, I'm not always sure what works, but how do we change minds? Can we change minds? And what are the arguments that folks that are kind of all on what we would call the right side about trying to bring down and end gun violence and create more controls and more policy? What are the arguments there that you think are effective or not effective within people on the same side?
So it's so important to remember that the only place where gun safety is polarizing is in the U.S. Senate. 90% of Americans support background checks, 89% of Republicans, 87% of gun owners, only 1 in 10 of whom even belongs to the NRA, right? There's very few issues in this country that has that much consensus. So do I think you're going to encourage or change the minds of every gun extremist? It's a very vocal minority in this country. No, I don't. I'm not sure you should spend your time doing it unless it's your family member or a neighbor. But I do think what we've seen is that so long it's been a silent majority that supports this issue. And they just haven't used their voices or their votes on this issue. We're seeing that dynamic change. I mean, if you look in Virginia in 2019, we were able to flip both chambers of the General Assembly, and this was one of the top issues to voters, was gun safety. We were able to flip the House in 2018. So I know that this is an issue that resonates with people. It's just so important to make sure you know where your candidates stand. And as you talked about gerrymandering, I mean, the only way we undo the impact of that is to be activists and to advocate and to vote.
So I talked to a lot of policy experts and a lot of activists, and when we're talking about gun violence, the question for all of these, or any policy expert or activist on any issue, I ask the same question to all of them now, which is how important, how worried are you about the future of democracy, the security of elections based on all of these laws being passed in several states now? How important is the future of democracy and the future of elections to the anti-gun violence organizations like yours?
Well, to that point, I mean, we worked with Fair Fight in the last election cycle for that reason. It's so important that people be able to vote. And what we saw that was so disturbing for our issue is this rise of armed extremism. People showing up, not just at elected officials' homes or in state houses, but at polling places, armed to the teeth. And that does not encourage democracy. In fact, it stifles it. You can't use the Second Amendment to eradicate the First. And so that was certainly something that we were involved in and will be and will continue to going forward. Something else that I was really heartened by was how many of our own volunteers and gun violence survivors that are part of our organization ran for office in 2020. And about 100 ran, 43 won, which is an amazing win record. One of those people won a seat in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. And she won a seat that had never been held by Democrats, and really has served as an effective block toward the Republicans going further down that road in Wisconsin. So I think running for office is also a version of Moms Demand Action 2.0 that's going to be really important in future elections.
Yeah, because your organization has done so much to help people win elections by endorsing them, by even, I would imagine, recommending that they consider running and encouraging them to. Can you tell me how much of a difference that has made? Because there's so many people, especially women and moms, that you guys have endorsed and that have gotten elected. And then once they get elected, they have voted for policies at the state and federal level. And I think that's important for, I don't even want to say progressives when it comes to the gun issue. I just want to say people who want, I hate the word sensible, but you have to use it, gun laws in this country. And you actually have to make the policies to get them done. And you're getting people elected at every level. Republicans, though, conservatives have been doing that on things like taxes and guns forever. And progressives, liberals, Democrats have had a very hard time. This does seem to be more of a litmus test for us. And I think that's important to some extent, at least to say, if you get elected, you have to have a stance on gun violence in America. And that's what it seems like you're both promoting and pressuring people to do. How am I doing describing what you're doing?
That's exactly right. I don't think we have a deep enough bench. And I say we. I want to be clear that Moms Demand Action is nonpartisan. Yeah. But this is an issue that has been important to Democrats more than Republicans. And I want that dynamic to change. But it doesn't unless we have every lawmaker on the right side of history. Now, when you go back to when President Obama was elected, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, not a single one does. In fact, the last one lost his seat in 2020 in Minnesota. Wow. But you have to replace lawmakers with people who support gun safety. And so that's where building this bench of activists who logically want to move from not just shaping policy, but to actually making it. We have two Moms Demand Action volunteers who are now members of Congress, Lucy McBath and Marie Newman. Lucy is a gun violence survivor from Georgia. She won a seat held by Republicans for 30 years. It's Newt Gingrich's old seat in Georgia. But we also have Moms Demand Action volunteers sitting in state houses now, all over the country, not just in blue states, in places like Kansas and Wisconsin and Iowa. And their voices and their votes are really important. And look, again, I understand the frustration, but you have to play the long game because that is how the system is set up. And you know, I have a daughter who is gay. She's 24, and she really doesn't understand the struggle. Like, to her, it just seems like it's always been this way, that she could be married to whomever she loved. And yet it was so many years of activists working so hard on the ground. And I think gun safety will be the same, that we will put in all of this work, again, the unglamorous heavy lifting of grassroots activism, and it will feel like a snowball and it will change. And this is part of that.
Well, I do wonder this about you. I think about you a lot. Sorry, that sounds creepy, but because of Twitter, and because of gun violence, and because, you know, I'm a big fan of your Twitter feed for reasons outside of just, you know, you tweeting about the activism, because you're hilarious and smart and effective on Twitter. You have one of the all-time most shocking tweets I've ever read that had nothing to do.
I know what you're going to say.
Well, I'll just say then, it was, you took a poll, you asked a question about how people thought about your husband mixing tuna fish with blueberries, and it shocked me to my conscience, to the point where I literally base your whole marriage on that one thing, and I got to, how could you be with a person who would do such a thing? And I wonder what the outcome of that is. He still doing that? And what was the outcome of that tweet, which was just...
He still defends that lunch. And as you said...
Does he still make it?
Not just tuna fish and blueberries, but many other disgusting items, including cheese. And he called it a salad. And
that's wrong.
He really was called out on Twitter for that. And he has not been making it in the last couple of years. Now, he would argue that it's just because he's making other things, but I do think that had an impact.
Good. I'm glad, because I think that was a very effective change that we got behind. But I ask because you're very good on Twitter, but you're often make me aware of a shooting that I didn't know happened. You're scanning the news in different accounts, and so the question is, how do you stay hopeful? How do you stay along the ride for this movement, and seeing all this violence every single day, also just constantly being threatened yourself every day? I'm sure it's got to be. I mean, how bad does it get on Twitter alone, social media alone? And how do you deal with both the hatred and the threats and the consistent violence and not just give up and turn away and go do something else, Shannon?
It has been an interesting experience and journey. I mean, I certainly never imagined that I would get threats of death, sexual violence to me, to my daughters. I just didn't know that underbelly of America existed. I'm glad I didn't. Sometimes being naive helps you. I never imagined I'd have to, travel with an alias and a security guard whose job it is to take me to the hospital, and to know what the closest hospital is in case anything horrible happens. At the same time, every day I work with people who have actually experienced gun violence. I mean, those are the heroes to me, that they wake up every single day having experienced such a horrific tragedy and yet are still fighting for the safety of complete strangers. Also, I'm really bolstered by the fact that we are winning. Again, I wouldn't do this every day as a full-time volunteer if I didn't see the difference we were making in state houses and city council and school boards and boardrooms. I just wouldn't. I really do believe we are on the precipice of major change in this country. And, I think Moms Demand Action is proof that sometimes David beats Goliath. We are beating the NRA. We are larger than the NRA. We are more effective than the NRA. We are more determined than the NRA, ultimately. Because if we lose our children, we have nothing left to lose. And I also think that it's my job to be the tip of the spear so that our volunteers can do the work that they do every single day, the work that's so incredibly effective. And our volunteers are so sophisticated and so brilliant. We're not just moms now. We're not just women. We're mothers and others. We're students demand action. And the work that they're doing is absolutely changing the culture of gun violence in this country. And eventually it will happen at a federal level.
One thing I've seen anecdotally is a lot of the people who got involved in your organization and your movement then got involved in other issues, kind of unrelated to gun violence. It's been an entry into activism and social change. Is that something that you've seen a lot of?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called Fight Like a Mother. All the proceeds go to gun violence prevention organizations. And part of the reason I wrote that book was because as I started forgetting everything going into perimenopause, I knew I needed to put it down on paper. And I wanted to explain how we had done this, because I get asked all the time, how do I do this maybe on a different issue in my neighborhood, in my community, in my state? And so I explain it, I think, pretty clearly in this book, of how Moms Demand Action came to be. And activism is so important. I think so often people don't think they have the time to be an activist. Right. It sounds like a full-time job like it is for me, but it doesn't have to be. Our volunteers sometimes refer to it as naptivism. It's that hour you take during the day when your kid is sleeping to use a hashtag or send an email or make a call. And again, drips on a rock. No small amount of activism is too small. It all matters. And I think when you put it that way, then volunteerism seems digestible. And it truly is.
Love it. National Gun Violence Awareness Day coming up June 4th. What's the ask from your organization? What do we do on National Gun Violence Awareness Day? And what do we do moving forward?
Yeah, it starts June 4th and it goes all weekend. Orange is the color of the Friends of Hydea Pendleton wore after her killing. I don't know if you remember her, but she was 15 years old. She was shot and killed in Chicago just a week after performing at President Obama's second inaugural parade in 2013. Orange is the color that hunters wear to say, don't shoot me. And so this is all about raising awareness in a nonpartisan, non-polarizing way. And so we ask everyone to get involved and to go to wearorange.org and see what we're doing where you live. and just take part in it. Even if you're just using the hashtag wear orange and showing a picture of yourself wearing orange that day in support.
Thank you so much for all the work you're doing, for joining me here on the podcast for the first time. All the information for Mom's Demand in the show notes. Shannon Watts, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much.
Shannon Watts, Shannon R. Watts on Twitter. Go now and let her know that you heard her here. She's a big get. People have a hard time booking her, but she's always been very cool to me, so I'm glad I got her to join. But it'd be great if you went on Twitter and said, thanks for joining Pete on Stand Up or whatever you want to say. That'd be awesome. Thank her for joining us. Okay, awesome organization. Go to their website, momsdemandaction.org. And now on to my second guest of today's program, Dr. Brian Rosenwald of Penn, an Ivy Leaguer. Yeah, that's right. Joins me, University of Pennsylvania. He's great on Twitter at Brian ROS1, Brian Ross1. He is a political and media historian. He's the author of Talk Radio's America and editor at Made by History. Check out that website. BrianRosenwald.com from the University of Pennsylvania joins me to talk about media and politics and the history of the conservative movement. I think you're really going to like this conversation. I certainly did. Here it is right now. You just finished the spring semester, as I said, and you were telling me before I hit record that you taught a course this past semester, The History of Conservatism. Were you able to keep your bias out of it?
Yeah. I mean, I work really hard at, I never have hid from my students what do I believe.
Yep.
But I work really hard. What I say to them day one in that seminar is, look, there are things that conservatives have done and said that are probably going to offend most of you, that are going to bother most of you. And obviously, there are always some students who are conservatives. I don't ask. I don't know unless they choose to share that. But what I say is it's a lot more interesting to try to understand people and what's motivating them than it is to judge them. To sit there with 2021 values and say, yeah, we're going to judge this guy from the 1960s. It's like, when you're teaching George Wallace, yes, obviously he was an inveterate racist. Obviously, he did and said terrible things. That's axiomatic. That's like establishment at one. But if you don't dig into it more and you don't figure out why, well, what's driving him, why is he popular doing this, then I think that you lose something. And we lose our ability to kind of understand the human condition and to understand how did we get to here. So I try to stress that stuff. And we did everything from, I had them watch Mrs. America this year. We did some All in the Family, and then serious academic reading. And then I did a speaker series on the future of conservatism with people who were all right of center, coming in from different perspectives, and they got to ask questions. And so I try to make it as interesting as possible.
Yeah,
and I try to delve
awesome.
into the stuff to the greatest extent that I can. But I always, try to say, let's try to understand these people. What is motivating them, as opposed to sort of that knee-jerk reaction to say, you know what, they're just terrible.
Well, I think that's awesome. I'd love to take that class. It sounds really interesting. And I mean, but I always get caught up thinking about conservatism in that some of it makes sense and you can understand, and it's kind of a traditional thing. But then I often get stuck when I hear the phrase, and this is the thing that a lot of serious people who are, I don't know, center right or moderate or living in the real world will say, I'm a fiscal conservative, but socially liberal. And I always want to say fiscal conservatism hasn't been conservative for so many different reasons. And I wonder what you think about that. When you hear the word fiscal conservative, how do you define that? And actually, have they been fiscally conservative, or would the right thing to do, and you're a policy guy, be to invest, use government to create policy that creates programs and opportunities so government can spend less money on all the things that, quote, conservatives get so upset about, like disability assistance, et cetera?
I think that fiscal conservatism usually boils down to one thing for a lot of people. I don't want to pay anymore. It really, in a lot of cases, is less about philosophy. And we're talking average voters here. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you talk to like a Paul Ryan, who's a total wonk, that's a little bit different. But, I think most people just have a sense that fiscal conservatism gained steam in the late 70s, early 80s, as people start to feel like, I can't give anymore. like my lifestyle will start to sacrifice. And all of a sudden they felt like government was giving money to people who they thought were less deserving. And they felt like those programs were not benefiting them, that they were struggling and government wasn't there for them. I think you're right that in a lot of cases, there's research out there that says, hey, if we invest more in the front end, we're going to spend less on the back end, whether that's in schools, so we're not putting it into prisons, whether that's in, like a universal basic income kind of thing where we give people a monthly stipend. And what we're finding is that it saves them, that it saves us money in other areas. So I think there's a strong case for what you're saying. And I think that Republicans, healthcare. And, like if you invest in people's healthcare, I always laugh at the private insurers because they're like, no, we won't pay for your orthotics, or no, we won't pay for this or that. But then when you need foot surgery later on, Pete, they're there for you for the foot surgery. It costs way more than that pair of orthotics. Yep. So I think that there's kind of a stupidity, a penny wise, dollar foolish thing to this. The other thing that I think is definitely true is that if you look at the data, go back to 1980, when conservatives overtook the Republican Party, they gained power to govern for the first time since 1932. And you trace it to the present, they have not been fiscally conservative. They've just spent on different things. They've spent on the military. They've spent on their priorities. And more what I think has been exposed beyond just fiscal issues, but in general with conservatives is they are not adverse to government power. They are not adverse to using government power to impose their viewpoints and their values on people. They claim to be, we're the small government party, we're the local government party. Well, that's until the local government tries to do something that they don't believe in. Then they have their state governments, which they control, overturn that. Ron DeSantis just signed a law that you can sue if a social media company takes you off of their platform. And I'm thinking to myself, how is that freedom? They claim to like freedom. They claim to government should stay out of things. So now a private company decides you don't meet their standards. What's next? Can you sue the guy who says, no, you can't come into my restaurant because you're not wearing a shirt?
Yeah, the words, and you know this better than almost anybody, that they use to kind of radicalize people so often is freedom and liberty. But I always look at that and think about gun violence and lack of healthcare options and mass incarceration. And I'm not sure what your definition of freedom and liberty is, but I don't share it. I mean, my main thought right there is healthcare, freedom from being sick or being, killed in some kind of accident that could have prevented. So I always get caught up in that. What about the history? I always think about conservatism, and I make I think erroneous generalization, as close as it might be to being somewhat accurate, that they're very religious, specifically Christian. And I wonder if that's changed that much with where we're at now, which I'll ask next.
Well, I think that it was not true necessarily, at least in terms of the parties. What happened is you always had a lot of religious conservatives in America, and that number skyrocketed in the 60s and late 60s, early 70s, during the 70s. As things got bad, people were seeking something more. You see the percentage of people enrolled in mainline denominations going down, and you see the rise of evangelical Christians, like those denominations going up. And starting in the 70s, they kind of overtake the Republican Party. And so conservatives, Republicans, religious voters, it all starts to become kind of one synonymous identity. And they all become grouped on one side. Now, obviously, and this is something that the conservative trolls love to point out all the time on social media, is that if you go back before the 70s, yes, you had a lot of Southern conservatives, racists, segregationists, were Democrats.
Lincoln was a Republican.
Party. They didn't like Republicans because, Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
So your Southern conservatives were all in the Democratic Party, or a lot of them were, until you get to the 70s. And then we see the party stratify. Republicans become a conservative party. Democrats become a more liberal party. And I think religion is driving a lot of it, to be very honest. They feel like their values are under siege. And this is one of those great points where I say to my students, again, you might say, well, that's crazy. And it's very hard to be under siege when you're a majority, right? But the perception, and this is where we want to understand people, is the perception going back to the late 60s. They thought that there were immutable values. These were the values that made America great. That's why the Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump slogan, "Make America Great Again," was so powerful to them, is that they felt like their values that they thought were the keys to American greatness, and they thought were immutable. These things were unchanging, that, they were never going to change. All of a sudden, they realized there were a lot of Americans who didn't like life governed by those values, specifically everyone who wasn't white, male, Christian, or at least wasn't female and believing in traditional relationships as being something ordained by God, started challenging these values. And it wasn't, just the rights movements. It was also that you get, content changes in movies and music. Gone is Mr. Ed and the Andy Griffith Show, and you start to get things that are a lot racier, a lot more violent, and all kinds of things. I mean, you get into the 80s and you've got Two Live Crew getting pulled off stage for their song "Me So Horny" because the cops were arresting them for obscenity,
That's right.
or Madonna or things like that. So you get this thing that they feel like their values are under siege. And if anything, over time, they feel this even more intensely because they're losing the culture wars. They spend a half century losing the culture wars. And in a lot of ways, one of the attractions of Donald Trump is, I think they know it's transactional. I think they know that he doesn't give a crap about conservative Christian values. I mean, you have to know that, I think. But he's willing to fight for them. He's willing to enter into that transactional relationship and fight for them and fight hard for them, despite the fact that he's basically a libertine and always has been.
One of the things I hate is the phrase "real Americans." What do you hear? What should we hear? How is that used? Have you looked at that?
I haven't looked at it specifically, but the danger in it is that it is used to exclude everybody who's a hyphenated American. And by which I mean anyone who's not born here, anyone who maybe is not white. It has a religious connotation, too, for a lot of people. And the joke is on a lot of the people pushing it these days, because if you go back, it was their grandparents or their great-grandparents who were the hyphenated Americans of the earlier times, right? Whether it was discrimination against the Irish in the 1850s, whether it was discrimination against Irish and Italians and Jews in the early 20th century, we have always had people who were the other, who were considered dangerous or different or challenging the values and therefore threatening, and people we wanted to try to keep out. So this notion of, well, you've got to be a real American. Well, what is a real American? I mean, it changes depending on who you're talking to. I hear the term and I probably think of the 80s Hulk Hogan, ring theme.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I went to those matches. I loved that when he came out to that song. It made me feel good.
That man was real American.
Yeah, but it's like, no, you're not. You're a roid head, and no one does what you do, and you're a super specific person. I don't know anything like you, Hulk. Your name is Hulk.
Well, then the funny part of that is if you actually go back and look at any of that stuff, that was one of my pandemic guilty pleasures.
Oh, yeah.
Guilty pleasures is, going on YouTube and finding some 80s wrestling stuff, is you find that there's a lot of jingoism and kind of racism and stuff in there.
The Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, and it's so easy to create villains out of, our, I mean, that's what came to mind when you said it.
I mean, I'm forgetting who the guy was, but somebody once wrestled in blackface, and you see all the stuff that by 2021 standards, you're like, ooh, why did I like that in the 80s?
And yet nobody had a problem with Jimmy the Superfly Snuka. It seemed we all loved him. And my
that's because he could leap off the top of a cage like he was nuts.
That's not.
And
that's
you're
not
well,
wrong.
I wouldn't do that, but hey,
it's a real American.
This guy will. But, there's this dichotomy, the sense, and you see it with Hogan. What is Hogan? He's the blonde white dude.
Oh, yeah.
Who's going to stand up for the flag against the foreign guys. And I saw something.
Sergeant Slaughter, too. Remember him?
Yeah. Like when he
war
turned
criminal
on America. Yeah, it was going to turn on America and then become Iraqi sympathizer during the Gulf War. And so Hogan has to beat him down. But I mean, I remember seeing something where the guys, they were the bushwhackers when they were on TV. But before that, they were villains called the sheep herders. And one of them was getting interviewed, and he was like, because we were from New Zealand, we used to get over with crowds, which means make the crowd like really into you, either hate you or love you, by stuffing an American flag in a toilet, and getting them really angry. But what was at the root of that was you're foreign, you're other.
Right.
And so I think that the idea of real Americanism is really problematic. And here's the truth. People are real Americans, in my view, if they come here and they want a better life. And they want to make America a better place. And they're adding something to our culture, to our society. Diversity is a great strength. It's not a weakness. It's not a problem. And so real Americanism, it's a problem. It really is, in terms of this concept, because if you've got real Americans, then you've got unreal Americans. And however you define it, you're reading some people out of the body politic, and that's not good.
Yeah, I think the real problem is when most people think of real Americans, they don't picture a non-white person. They picture a white person. I think that's what I think of when I think of that phrase, because I think that's what they're generally referring to. But let me get back to this, the history of conservatism, or more specifically, the future of conservatism, because where we're at right now is interesting. I'm hearing a lot of smart commentators who I like and trust talk about the Republican Party has no agenda. It has no platform. It has no policies. It is basically a cult of personality, that personality being Donald Trump's. And if anything, the main driving policy right now is changing election law, changing voter laws, and making it harder for certain types of folks to vote. Other than that, it's just making sure transgender people don't use a bathroom or something. Like, what do you think about that commentary on the future of the current state of the Republican Party, that they don't have an agenda, that they don't have a platform?
I don't think you have to go any further than a tweet sent by George P. Bush saying that it was great to talk to Donald Trump he was sitting in the car with his phone. Now, we're talking about Jeb's kid. Now, I don't know about you, Pete, but if somebody mocked my dad, mocked my grandparents, was all over my family, I don't think I could kiss his butt.
My ambition would be to end him some way, or spend my whole career trying to take down as he went after my dad. But maybe George and Jeb don't like each other, or maybe George's political ambitions are just that's all that matters.
I mean, I think that's what it is that he's that ambitious. He wants to, apparently, the rumor is that he wants to run for attorney general in Texas and improves that the party is a cult of personality. If you're not sufficiently for, the Ohio Republican Senate primary right now, there's like 4 candidates, and they're literally competing to see who can kiss up to Trump more. They all like went to Mar-a-Lago, and they're all like trying to, and one of them was like insufficient. She said something that wasn't mean about the Ohio Republican congressman who voted for impeachment.
That was not mean.
It was not mean. It was almost kind of like, okay. And so now they're like, well, she might have lost. She might have killed herself already because she's lost the Donald Trump primary. And this is crazy, Pete. They don't have an agenda. And, I think that they don't seem to understand that since 2004, every 4 years, another cohort of 18-year-olds comes into the electorate, and they've gotten killed with those voters going back now 17 years. And if you look at the demographics, they're not doing well with anybody under 45.
Is that right? Like that hasn't changed with Trump. I mean, it's just all anecdotal, but I do see a lot of young people that, because I guess it's just more indelible when you see a young person who's super conservative, because the vast majority of younger people have always generally been more liberal, more progressive. But so that those numbers haven't necessarily changed with the rise of Trump.
No, if anything, it's been worse. It's like 2/3, 1/3. And I think what you're seeing is if you're the 1/3, they've radicalized more. They sort of like their elders.
They're louder.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They are, they kind of want to be trolls. They've got all these young kind of trollish people who've realized, a lot of whom are grifters, the Charlie Kirks of the world, who have understood that there's money to be made at this. But I also think that if you're the 1/3 and you feel more and more like you can't say what you're thinking, like you're out of step with your peers, that it leads to kind of an intensification of your feelings and looking for your tribe and sort of wanting to beat your chest and be like, I'm part of something. Right. And so I think that it's become more visible in the Trump age. But if you look at the data, it's not good for them. And I think there is a center-right party that could have some appeal to younger voters, but they're going to have to come up with solutions and policy proposals that address the issues that are worrying those voters. And they don't have any of that. They don't even, everything they do, even their talking points about, how we should be worried about inflation. I'm just amused because I'm like, if people are under 50, do they really fear inflation? Like, they didn't live through the 70s. But it shows that their base is all that they conceive of Americans as these over 50 people. And yes, they're younger congressmen that they have, Mass and Cawthorn and people like that are just straight up like internet trolls.
Yeah.
But, if you look at them, they are out of step with 2/3 of their own generation. And so I think that, Republicans are creating a big problem for themselves long term. Now, of course, as you mentioned, one way that you can succeed while not being a majority is to make it harder for the majority to vote. And so they are pursuing all of this, voter suppression stuff. And look, I think that the difference between today's voter suppression laws and the voter suppression laws of yesteryear is that in most cases, if you're willing to work hard enough today, you can vote. Barack Obama has said this, that, it might be harder to vote than it should be. It might be, they might be trying to throw these barriers up. Yep. But if you're really willing to work at it, you can. Well,
I think what you're saying, I think it's interesting that you're saying that from a more expert point of view, because what I've seen kind of anecdotally throughout history, and specifically when we're talking about black voters, is they're so pissed by the indignity, they'll do whatever it takes to organize everybody for weeks and months, like getting them leaving from church, souls to the polls. But more importantly, I'm just creating this picture. They'll wait in line forever with this kind of indignity or frustration or pride, however you want to name it. Say you're not going to take my vote, and the consequence, the unintended consequences, is more people sometimes turn out, and that's why they say.
I think that could be where we're headed here, that these laws actually galvanize people to come out and make them really angry, but they're still bad. And this is the conversation I keep trying to have. People on Twitter never like my answers on this because it requires nuance, which is to say, look, I can say they're bad. I can say we shouldn't be passing them. I can say we absolutely should be making it easier for people to vote anywhere. And unless and until you can show me some fraud or some problem, like actual cases, not imagined cases, not made up in your mind, not, less likely than getting struck by lightning, then I don't want to pass things that are addressing problems that are figments of people's imaginations that don't exist, especially when they don't want to do anything about the real risk to our elections, which is foreign hacking and things like that. But, this is bad, and it's bad because they're going to get more extreme. And they're going to keep pushing these things because they can't win a majority. And when you can't win a majority, what do? You want to make the electorate. If it's smaller, if it's whiter, then you do better. So I think this is a real problem. And I think it's a huge change. Remember, Voting Rights Act last gets renewed in 2006. It's signed by George W. Bush. It's supported overwhelmingly by Democrats and Republicans in colleges. This is before John Roberts guts a key provision of it. Now, I don't think that they can get more than 2 or 3 Republican votes for that bill unless Republicans decide, you know what, this isn't actually going to hurt us, whatever is being proposed, and we should do it because we want to keep the Senate filibuster or something like that. It's been a sea change, and it's been driven by fears of a rising population that is less white. And more recently, it's been driven by fears that Donald Trump claimed the election was rigged, despite the fact that there's like not a single shred of evidence. There is more evidence, Pete, that I'm a millionaire and I'm not a millionaire. So there's no evidence at all than there is that there was voter fraud or anything that influenced the outcome of the 2020 election.
I have a good example to illustrate the point you're making about Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio wants to investigate UFOs. But he doesn't want to investigate what happened on January 6th. And there's no evidence that the election was stolen, but there's a ton of evidence about UFOs. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it is just the whole thing is like an alternative universe. The number of people who are convinced. And the crazy thing is Trump telegraphed all this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He told us like 4 months in advance, well, if I lose, I'm going to tell you that it was stolen.
On the New York Times Magazine had they did just like screenshots of all of his tweets saying just that weeks before the election. The whole cover of the magazine was covered with his tweets seeding the ground that what you just said, if I lose, it'll be because it was stolen from me. And then he said it was stolen from me. And now, thousands, millions of Americans believe that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's crazy. Like, we knew in advance. They explained to us in a lot of these states, look, tons of people who have always voted at the polls, like myself, are voting by mail because we're in a pandemic. We have these systems where in a lot of places, like my home state of Pennsylvania, for idiotic reasons, the election officials were not allowed to count the mail ballots until after the polls close. Well, then if you have to turn around and count millions of ballots, it's going to take some time.
Not the case in other states, though. To be clear, other states, including Florida, who's far from perfect, allow you to count the ballots ahead of time. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yes, and they used to have a big vote by mail system, but they just enacted one of those laws to make it harder to vote by mail. But what happened was, because Donald Trump was downplaying the pandemic, Democrats took it a lot more seriously and said, I don't want to go wait in a line at the polls with a bunch of other people who could give me COVID. So I'm going to vote by mail. And Republicans didn't. And because you had a split, which we had never seen before, if anything, vote by mail had helped Republicans, older voters, people who were, not had struggled more to get to the polls physically. You had this big split, which created leads for Donald Trump. And he was basically like, this is sort of how I feel when watching the Phillies some nights. I would like to end the game at the second or third inning. We're ahead. That's plenty. And that's sort of what he did. We're done. I'm ahead. Sorry, it's over. Right. We don't need the rest of the game. And that's what he did. And court after court rejected it. Every investigation that you saw was like, there's nothing here. And yet these people fervently believe it. They're changing laws. And what I love the most from like a cynical, this is brutal and ballsy kind of move, is that Republicans are now like, look, it doesn't really matter what happened in the election. We have to add these stricter new laws that are going to do nothing but make it harder for people to vote because we need to restore confidence in the electorate. I mean, that's like kids saying, I left the refrigerator doors open, but not the freezer. So all the food's bad, so we have to eat ice cream for dinner. Like, are you going to turn around and reward them? I mean,
I would. I actually would. I think that's a brilliant way to get ice cream for dinner. And I think that kind of manipulation and dishonesty will take you quite far in life, right to the RNC. That's a great metaphor. But let me ask you, though, about, Liz Cheney, because, you emailed me and you said, we can also talk when I was asking you about some topics that why Democrats should be rooting for the Liz Cheneys of the world. And so last night she's on Axios with Jonathan Swan, and she's making the case for these new voting laws. And she's in the end, to me, it feels like she's no better than the rest, because she's saying, listen, there was no fraud, and Donald Trump lost the election fair and square. And when Al Gore conceded, that was a great thing. And Donald Trump not conceding yet is a bad thing. But yet she makes the case and argues, and he pushed her to give an example of why it's necessary. And she wouldn't, because there isn't. But she's still making the case for these laws, which is the effect of all the lying and dishonesty. And so I feel like, in a way, she's not really any better. She's just a little bit cleaner than the rest of them. What do you think?
So if you asked 2005 me, 2006, Bush era me, would you ever be on the same side of the Cheneys on anything? I literally would have looked at you like you had two heads. It would not have entered my mind. And I don't like or agree with her on anything politically. I mean, we're talking about the person who came out against LGBT marriage, despite the fact that she had no problem going to her sister and her sister's wife's house and things. She is not someone I like or approve of. All I feel like is, look, the number one threat to American democracy today is Republicans' kind of rising authoritarianism. Republicans' willingness to say there are no lines anymore. We will do anything. And so these Republicans who have drawn lines, people like Liz Cheney, who I disagree with on most things, I'm sort of saying, if you're an ally in my cause of beating back the number one problem, then I'm willing to, root for you in this fight. That doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with you on other things. That doesn't mean I'm going to say, oh, you're as good as someone I agree with on a lot more, or someone who isn't being cynical about this stuff, or someone, she said she wouldn't vote for Democrats. She's said and done plenty of things in the last couple of weeks where I'm like, God, you're making this hard. You're making this hard on me. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, we are better off with a party of Liz Cheney's. I think to have a healthy democracy, we need two sane parties. And we're better off with a party of Liz Cheney's who are far right, but at least are willing to say, look, understand the importance of the peaceful transition of power. Understand that you can't have a guy who's the hero of your party who's gaslighting everyone. I think that we're better off with that than a party of Donald Trump bootlickers. People like Elise Stefanik, who I think I probably agree with more on things, but who has sold her soul to rise in the party and kissed up to Donald Trump. I'd rather have the Liz Cheneys who are at least honest and terrible. If that...
I know, but that's what I was saying up until I saw that interview, in which case she's making the case for all of these new voter law restrictions, even though there isn't any reason for it. And by the way, there's been more instances, at least from what I've seen, of Republicans voting fraudulently. Like, wasn't there a story where a guy killed his wife and then pretended to be?
That was the best story I saw in the last month. I mean, he killed his wife and then he voted her absentee ballot for Donald Trump because he thought Trump needed another vote.
And we don't need to make any laws against that, because that's not a problem. I mean, it's not like that's happening to have an effect on the outcome of any election at any level. But as long as Liz Cheney is arguing that we need these new laws, in effect, she's arguing for the sum of all the arguments that Donald Trump and his acolytes seem to be making the case for.
Yeah, and I mean, look, one reason why the Liz Cheneys of the world probably aren't going to win this fight is that there is a consistent
the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, talk about someone who is totally out there. Maybe she's a UFO. Maybe Marco Rubio wants to investigate her or something.
Oh my gosh, but crazy.
If you go back even to the 1960s and 1970s, when first you had liberal Republicans, then you had moderate Republicans, then you had kind of pragmatic conservatives. Each wave of sort of brawls in the Republican Party between the far right and the kind of establishment Republicans, the establishment has never fought in the same way. I mean, go back to those 80s wrestling matches. The establishment is kind of like the good guy, and the insurgents, the far right people, the people today, the Trump, the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing, they're throwing salt in your eyes, Pete. Then they're hitting you over the head with a chair. They are fighting dirty. And the other side is like, well, we basically agree with them on all of this. And, oh, no, I would never vote for a Democrat. Right. I'm never going to side with the Democrat. Right. If you're fighting with your hands tied behind your back and the other guy is kicking you in the nuts, you're not going to win. And this is the problem. Liz Cheney doesn't get this. But if she's going to stand up for those voter suppression laws, she's going to say, well, we need them, even though Trump, we should just focus on Trump and Trump's lies and all this. Like, she's not going to win. You want to go down swinging. And I think they've always embraced, we saw this after 2016. How many quotes did you see off the record or people who are on backgrounds, congressmen saying, oh, my God, we think he's nuts. Oh, my God, he's so terrible. They wouldn't put their names on it. They cared more about their future. And the problem with all of this is that they've all emboldened him. They've all enabled him. They've all advanced him, taking him to the party. And now some of them, like Liz Cheney, have looked up and been like, crap, like we have to fight back. Well, now everybody's on his side. And they are even now. You have her saying, well, we still need these voter ID laws and all this other stuff. There's literally no empirical evidence saying that they do anything good. And look, there's a way that we could come up with a national system of voting that included some of their ideas that wouldn't be problematic, that would do other things. But the issue is that you're right, that they, there aren't pure figures in the Republican coalition. There's maybe a couple of them. And at this point, we're left kind of groping for, well, this person's principled. At least they're an honest, person. I think back to a quote I found from my research, a book about a talk radio host railing about he endorsed a Democrat, and this is in the late 90s. And it's like, look, I'd rather have the honest one than the two-faced lying liberal. And so I kind of feel that way about the Liz Cheneys of the world. Like, if we can't agree when it's pouring rain, that it's pouring rain, we have a real problem as a country.
Yep.
So I tend to think that she's better than Donald Trump, but she's certainly not the best of the current Republicans, and she's certainly not without her flaws. And to be very clear, there is no evidence that any of the laws that Republicans are pushing will do anything to safeguard our elections. Literally giving people less time and fewer options to vote doesn't safeguard anything at all. It doesn't make anything better. It just makes your life harder.
Okay, so I will put you down for Liz Cheney supporter. Okay, Brian, two more big questions if you have time. One of which is, like, I'm thinking in terms of media, and you, by the way, Brian's book is so good. Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States. You wrote the book on this, but what we're seeing the last few weeks or months since the election certainly has been interesting. I'm thinking of like a diagram of the food chain where a bird eats a mosquito and then some bigger predator eats the bird. And that's what we're seeing kind of with conservative media. Fox News is not nearly conservative enough. And guess what else isn't? Newsmax. No, OAN now is positioning Newsmax to be like secretly liberal. And Fox, of course, is very liberal. And it's wild seeing what's happening. And OAN, I guess, is still upholding the big lie. And Newsmax and Fox aren't necessarily most of the time. They certainly are some of the time. What do you make of what's happening to conservative media? And I suppose we could throw in podcasts and YouTubers and you know, how they're radicalizing things, even those who have been deplatformed like Alex Jones.
We've been seeing this for 15 or 20 years, where the problem is that the overall audience for conservative media, the overall pool of of listeners, of viewers, has not grown. But meanwhile, the number of shows has gone up exponentially when we add in radio and podcasts and television and all these different things. And so when you have more people fighting for the same audience, you have to distinguish yourself in some way. And so there's been this push to radicalize, to move to the right, to move to seeing, you know, politics as warfare, to do something to distinguish yourself, to create a brand. And so we've seen it kind of most vividly in this chapter, post-election, where OAN and Newsmax have tried to outflank Fox, in which you have some hosts, you know, who are gingerly trying to gently kind of say to their audience, look, we lost. I didn't say that. I said real low, you know, like, but we lost.
We didn't win.
And then you have others who are just like all big lie all the time. And I think it's bad because you know, people live in these echo chambers enough. And the thing that I think is scariest is that all of these outlets, all of these hosts have an incentive to deride the mainstream media, to say that thing you read in the newspaper, it's a lie, because they're out to get our guys. They want to run down anyone who could champion your values. And so what they do is people live in this echo chamber. And when someone presents like an exhaustive reported story about how there was no stolen election or something, they say, oh, the Associated Press, they're so biased. Or, oh, this one is so biased. It's a way of sort of denying the obvious. It's like if you think your scale is biased against you, you can keep telling yourself that every day you get on the scale, and then you don't address the problems. You don't deal with the underlying issues. And so I think this is dangerous, that people are retreating more and more into this. And the more that you think that people are out to get you, the more that you think that this is kind of like sort of Armageddon, the more you might be willing to do something radical. And so I think this is really dangerous and problematic. I think that you see a lot of very irresponsible people in the conservative media today. Not all, but most, especially, you know, on the cable news and talk radio end of things, because they understand that if you're insufficiently pro-Trump, if you're insufficiently pro-big lie, if you're insufficiently anti, you know, cancel culture and anti this and anti that, your audience isn't going to be there. There is no audience for moderate, sensible, you know, kinds of things. And you've seen people get run out of the conservative media. And you know, let's be honest, since the election, we've seen Tucker Carlson keep going up. Sean Hannity, who's just your kind of run-of-the-mill Republican pundit, go down a little bit because, you know, Hannity's big cachet in the Trump years was he's Trump's BFF. He's always talking to him, all this other stuff. Whereas Carlson is doing all this kind of racism stuff and white nationalist stuff where he doesn't even try to hide it anymore.
Right.
And I don't think he believes most of it, but he's saying
even worse.
And it's even worse. So I think it's bad. I think it's dangerous. I think it is getting worse in a lot of ways. They're going to places that I don't think that conservative media would have gone 20 or 25 years ago. There were lines. I know people on the left are shaking their heads saying, what are you talking about? But there were, in fact, lines that wouldn't be crossed. But the problem is that, like, Rupert Murdoch doesn't care about advertising revenue right now.
Right.
When it comes to Fox, he cares about the fact that Tucker Carlson is pulling in viewers. And viewers give him leverage when he's negotiating what they call carriage agreements with cable companies. So that he can charge them more.
So there's there's nowhere to stop them. Either they're not, somehow there is this movement. I think it's probably not worth it. I'd love to see it succeed to get Fox News off of cable providers, but because that's where they make their money. But that's not going to be.
I don't think that the Comcast of the world are going to engage on that, or any of the other cable companies, for the simple reason that for every person that they might lose by not doing it, they're going to lose someone if they do it.
Right.
I thought that the one kind of hope that I thought that was out there is if the organizations like the NFL that have a business relationship with Rupert Murdoch and Fox said, look, either rein this guy in who's like pushing all this white nationalist stuff, or you're not going to get our product, or we're going to, you're going to have a problem with us. I thought maybe that might work, at least while they were negotiating an NFL contract. It didn't happen. But, absent something like that, the bottom line with most conservative media executives is this. They care about the almighty dollar. If this is good for them and good for their bottom line, they're going to let it happen.
Right.
And there's not a real easy solution out there. People keep trying to dream up regulatory schemes. But here's the thing. We have seen, after fighting a 50-year drug war, that if there's a market for something, it's going to exist. Even if you push it to the dark web, it will exist so long as people want this content. So I think we'd be better off trying to change our culture, better off trying to build audiences for healthy media. And more, I'm thinking better off figuring out a way to invest in local media, invest in convincing people to support their local newspapers, their local television stations, and keeping those things locally owned, so you don't have some company like Sinclair, who I think is maybe more dangerous than Fox, because they're coming in, they're buying up local television stations. They're one of the largest owners of local television stations. And then the middle of the local news, you're going from like murder to sports to weather to random commentary that's like pro-Trump from their national commentator. And it's hidden in there. And what we've seen we have studies and things that show that people think that local news is not as partisan. People are looking at it as more trustworthy. And so I think that what we need to do is kind of safeguard that. Try to lead to, local outlets that are struggling today flourishing, having a robust local media, because maybe that's the way around all of this national disaster stuff.
Another time, I don't know how interesting it is for us to talk, but certainly on the podcast, certainly love to talk with you about this. This is kind of something I'm seeing develop with this show, is that you could have a national show that seems local because my audience is connected to me. Like, I meet up with them Thursday night. Like, they subscribe for this show. If they want to criticize me, I'm going to read that criticism. I'll get on the phone with them. And there's this interesting thing popping up, good or bad, but I'm trying to argue for the good, that there's a media outlet where it's more local because you have access to the producers or the host. And I wonder if that's potentially something we see happening in a good way moving forward. It can argue the evils of that too. But before I let you go, I want to ask you about one more political question, which is the conventional wisdom, because it always happens, almost always, except after Bush, after 9/11, is that the majority, will lose its majority in the House if opposite of the president's party. And that's what most, I think, political analysts are saying about the Democrats' majority in the House. Are they going to, what do you think? Are they going to lose in 2022?
I think that might be wrong this time. Now, it's obviously too early to tell. We don't even know what the maps are going to look like for the House because they haven't been drawn yet.
Okay.
But if you look, I have three reasons why I think this. One is if you look at the midterm elections, that the president's party did all right. 1934, middle of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt, people feel like he's making their life better, but it's a crisis. 2002, after 9/11, people didn't want to change, captains midstream here, parties midstream. And we're in that kind of crisis moment now. And I think that every indication we have is that things are going to keep getting better over the next year. And if they do, I think that Joe Biden may accrue some credit for that. So that's point one. Another midterm where the party out of power didn't do well was 1998, when Newt Gingrich decided brilliantly that the issue to run on was impeaching Bill Clinton over sex. And I think that what that showed is when the party out of power is extreme, when they do nutty things, that people can say, you know what, we're just not going to change, and give you power on this. And Republicans, again, are kind of out there right now. They are pushing ridiculous things. And I see no break that's going to make them less ridiculous over the next year. Right. If anything, it's going to go in the opposite direction. And then there's another factor, which is that if you look over the last 3 or 4 election cycles, we are seeing fewer and fewer places that will say vote for Biden for president and a Republican for Congress. We're seeing fewer and fewer places that voted for, a Democratic senator and a, Republican for president. We had in 2016 and 2020, only one senator won a state where their party's presidential nominee was losing, Susan Collins in Maine. And you only saw a few of those people in 2018, like 3, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, John Tester of Montana, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who had really strong local brands. So I wonder if part of that midterm flip was always predicated on people's willingness to swing from party to party. But there's another factor, and this is, I think, the key factor. This is the warning sign for Democrats. There have been polling that showed that the enthusiasm, the energy for Republicans right now is matching the level of where Democrats were in 2017. And the Democratic enthusiasm has slipped to where Republicans were at that point. What this comes down to, and I think this is a message that, liberals need to understand, the liberal voting coalition, is that if you look at 2010 and you look at 2014 and why things went wrong for Democrats, it was because their people didn't come out and vote. They became disengaged. They exhaled. Obama won. They exhaled. Yep. And things were, better. And they were like, okay, we can, relax a little bit. I thought and hoped that Trump taught people the lesson that if you exhale, if you tune out, if you say, oh, there's no difference between these parties, you could end up with Donald Trump as president, and maybe you shouldn't do that. But if that happens, if the liberal voting coalition does not show up in 2022, then yeah, Republicans are going to gain power because they're angry. The people who are, the reason that midterm phenomenon happens is the people who are most motivated to show up in midterms. We're Americans. We consider it a burden to show up more than once every 4 years. We vote in very low numbers. The turnout for midterms is usually in the 40s, which is pathetic, But the people who show up are the angry ones. Yep. They're the ones who feel like their side's getting trampled upon and whatnot. So it really comes down to that. If they can get Democratic voters to show up, I think that they have a real chance here because I don't see Joe Biden doing anything that's going to alienate swing voters. I don't see Joe Biden, I think the economy is going to get better and people vote their pocketbooks. Right. I don't see Republicans having a real agenda or any real selling points. But it comes down to if the Democratic voters say, oh, we got rid of Trump, we can relax now, everything's better, I can focus on what drinks I'm having tonight or something, then we've got a problem. The Democrats have got to figure out that you need to show up every 2 years. You need to vote in local elections because for state courts and things, a lot of those elections are this year or offbeat times and things. And that I think is really key is that Democrats have to get, the people who show up when turnout is smaller is often older, whiter voters. Yep. That was how it always was. Now, in 2020, we saw some differences where a bigger electorate did not help Democrats. But, I still think that if you look at 2022, if you tell me turnout's 55%, I'm going to say that's great for Democrats. If you tell me turnout's 40%, I'm going to say Democrats have a problem. And those were exaggerated numbers. I know some people will sit down and look at the numbers for past elections and send me emails and be like, well, do you know what you're talking about? Well, yeah, I'm exaggerating to make a point.
Don't worry, my audience isn't that wonky on the percentages, but really great points. And so great to talk to you, Brian. Always great to talk to you. I really appreciate you joining me and giving me so much of your time and expertise. I know you've got to get back to the busy life of a professor between semesters.
Absolutely, Pete. We have to keep the nose to the grindstone, right?
Yeah. And I'm glad you do, because I love you. Keep it up on the Twitter feed. Everybody go to the links to find out everything else about Brian, and follow him on Twitter and get his book. And always great to talk to you. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Always happy to do it.
Brian Rosenwald, how about it? At BrianROS1 on the Twitter, and check out BrianRosenwald.com. Get his book, Talk Radio's America. Check out Made by History, and I'll probably be talking to Brian like once a month. He is always up for it. I think he's a brilliant guy and a great. Always learn a lot from him. Okay, also Shannon Watts, make sure you thank her. Go over to Twitter and thank Shannon on Twitter as well. Those are your two assignments, as well as hopefully you will consider joining me tonight at 7 p.m. to talk about this program and this community and how to build it and grow it and just make it better. And looking forward to you tonight. If you're a subscriber, there should be a link in today's post. And if you're not, join up now. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes and be a part of this growing community and learn along with us to make the journey a little bit better and more understandable. How about that? Thanks so much for listening. Go give a review on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars, and tell your friends. And now it's time for singer-songwriter, Grammy Award winner, the great John Carroll, to sing us out with a song he wrote just for us. It's John Carroll with Stand Up.
Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. Seize the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, to make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.